Happy Sunday. How are you? Welcome, welcome, welcome. Come on in the space. This is Renita Alexander with Set It Up Sunday. This is my Sunday conversation where I talk about all the ways that we can set ourselves up for success in whatever way we define success. And so I'm here again on this Sunday and for the first time on LinkedIn. So hello to LinkedIn. Hopefully that I can't see anything. So if you are here live, please say hey. And if you can give StreamYard permission to see your name, then I can absolutely see who is with us. So as I always talk about with Set It Up Sunday, leading yourself is the foundation of leading anything. And so we talk about leading yourself from an intentional perspective during Set It Up Sunday. And that theme of intention is kind of why I've been talking about trauma. So I've been talking about trauma for this month of April. And it's something that I've been studying since last year when I was asked about how unacknowledged trauma might affect our ability to release any barriers that may be blocking us from doing what we're supposed to do. So I've talked about what I perceived, or what I started the conversation. I started the conversation 4 weeks ago, about talking about what I perceived as the intentionality of Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson during her Senate hearings to confirm her. And then, of course, the first time I talked about that was right before we had the big slap between Will Smith and Chris Rock during the Academy Awards. And so to me, that was an example of maybe being unintentional, maybe as a result of trauma. Of course, we don't know. And so I've been exploring the topic since then, just to talk about what trauma is, and then all the things that we can do, which I haven't really gotten into, just really have been laying the foundation for what trauma is. But I'm so happy to have with me tonight to talk about this subject of trauma, Crystal Turner. So Crystal is a psychiatric nurse who has also specialized in some healing modalities. And she is someone that I have partnered with on a workshop. And so just happy to have her here tonight to talk about this topic. So Crystal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Renita.
You're so welcome. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, so my name is Crystal Turner, as mentioned, and yes, I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I've been a nurse practitioner in psychiatry for roughly 4 years, and I work in community health on the south side of Chicago. So I service a lot of people who look like us, and there's a lack of that in our community, so it's very important to me. I've been a nurse for about a little over 20 years, and a large chunk of that time I have worked in psychiatry in some way, or shape, or form. So something I learned early on in my career is that mental health was something that caught my attention more, and I really connected with it. I really felt a genuine empathy for people who experience any type of mental health that's going on, and just really as time has gone on,
Uh-oh.
mental health challenges.
Crystal, we lost you for just a second.
I saw that. I was like, keep talking just in case.
Right. Okay.
Now, what I was saying is that I've become very interested in just new information that's come up in recent years in terms of just the expanded ways of viewing mental health, and how mental health impacts us or can impact a person. So that's my background.
Yes, such a fascinating topic. And of course, during this last couple of years, we have all, been impacted to varying degrees
Mhm.
by the pandemic, and how that is just impacted all of us. And of course, I know the mental health community anticipated and has stepped up to really address the mental health issues as a result of the isolation, or just the fear and the death and destruction, and people who have had to deal with that, whether they're working closely with patients, or if they've lost people, lost loved ones, lost friends and families, and then just the impact of not maybe having, to go to work, or maybe having to go to work when you're afraid. So just, I mean, so many aspects of how our mental health is impacted. And then so and and then of course, on top of that, just day-to-day life, and all the things that have happened, from the racial reckoning that we've dealt with and continue to deal with in this country. And so just a lot going on. So I've talked about trauma. Again, I've kind of defined it so much, not so much the traumatic event, but the wound. So trauma comes from the Greek word for
Uh-oh, I think
wounding.
you froze on me.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Hello? Okay, so I don't know if it's me or you. Okay. We're gonna have to figure out something. Okay, so I was just saying that trauma, comes from the Greek word for wound, and it's the wound that is a result that of something that's happened to us, often in childhood.
Mhm.
And so, it's not the event or the experience; it's the words. Again, it's what happens to us, and what does happen. And I know we talked about what are some of the ways that response to the traumatic event in our lives can show up.
That's a good question. So yeah, I think that in a general sense, oftentimes when someone's experienced trauma, one of the things that kind of participates to defining that is one's inability to function in a normal sense in their life, or is impacting their lives in a way where they're not able to have forward movement in the way
Mhm,
they would
mhm,
like. So that can show up in many ways. Oftentimes, if someone's had trauma, some of the dominant symptoms may be that they experience flashbacks, or they may have nightmares. They may have like intrusive thoughts. Oftentimes, there's very high levels of anxiety that's associated with it. And mood can be impacted where people are feeling depressed. So those are just like some general ways. And
mhm,
oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes people who have experienced trauma, they don't want to think about the trauma because it's so difficult, and it kind
mhm,
of brings back for many people that experience as if they're in it in the moment. So
mhm,
I think
mhm,
the
mhm.
general things that I see in people, that kind of goes toward that diagnosis of trauma.
Okay, okay. Now, is it possible to have trauma and not recognize it?
Oh, for sure.
Mhm, mhm,
For sure. There are
mhm,
some people who don't even remember, they could go years without even remembering that they've had a trauma, because oftentimes
mhm,
it's the brain, the mind, and the body's way of protecting. It understands sometimes that people are going through something so maybe horrendous, or
mhm,
or
mhm,
so challenging, that the way to protect it is to put it out of the mind.
mhm, mhm,
Some people, as they get older, there can be an event that happens, that can trigger it, and all of
mhm,
that comes
mhm,
flooding back to a person.
mhm,
So
mhm,
it can go functioning and have symptoms of trauma and not know. And even someone, if they have these memories in their mind, they do not necessarily connect it with having had some form of trauma that they've,
mhm, mhm,
but they're definitely showing the challenges in their life that impact them being able to, really, be at one, or be at peace with life, or
mhm.
be able to move and function in a way that they would really desire to.
Absolutely. So you made a comment about I want to kind of make it maybe differentiate between something that is, we think of abuse as being really a horrific, traumatic experience. So can you kind of differentiate between maybe, I don't know, big trauma, and I did read a little trauma. So can you make and maybe there's not maybe you don't say it in those terms, but I did read that from a psychologist recently. But can you make a difference between sort of some big event and then, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So definitely the big trauma and little trauma, I have heard of that. And the differentiating factor typically is that a big trauma typically is a trauma that people would expect to define as a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Bias, but in our minds, many people who maybe do not know trauma in depth, there are certain events that we will automatically define as traumatic, and those
Gotcha.
are
Mm-hmm.
big life incidents. Maybe it's been I recall some years back there was a tsunami, and I forget where that took place at.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was a huge world or event in a part of the world that many people suffered. Something like rape,
Mm-hmm.
or going to war. Oftentimes these are thought of as like big T traumas. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes it's a definite threat to one's life.
Mm-hmm.
Feel like they may not survive, their life may not be saved, or
Mm-hmm.
they may not survive living through that trauma, that traumatic event. Whereas opposed to little T traumas are more they may be smaller, they may be smaller in event, or they may not. But the thing about it is, oftentimes there's a back-to-back experience of these traumas that end up being a culmination of things. So an example of that could be someone who loses loved ones, numerous loved ones in a short period of time. Maybe they've lost their mom 1 month, the next month they.
One of us is frozen. So, Crystal, you were talking. Crystal?
Okay, I'm back.
So we lost you right around, you were talking about, maybe the loss, which of course that would describe a lot of people right now in the last couple of years that have gone through that. Yes.
Absolutely. So yeah, it can be numerous loss. It could be, it could be the loss of lives. Let's just say I've known people who in a 6-month period, it's like they've lost someone every month. So they have to recoup from the first thing when something else is coming.
Gotcha. Okay.
That can be the difference. Even if someone expects that someone is going to pass away, if they're having these back-to-back incidents happening where they haven't been able to process and regroup and kind of heal from it, then those kind of signify little T traumas.
Gotcha. Okay. And so trauma can happen, a lot of times we think of it something that's happened in our childhood, but it can also happen, throughout our lives, things that, are life-threatening. Yeah, absolutely. So I know you, and I think we were talking before we actually went live. And so about this idea that, trauma can reside in resides in our bodies sometimes. So so if you would kind of talk about some of the ways that we can recover, process from trauma when we've had traumatic, or when we get triggered, what are some of the things that we can do? You and I also talked about sometimes that being triggered may be our bodies telling us something that needs to be looked at. So, just kind of talk about a little bit about the healing. How do we heal from trauma if we find ourselves triggered?
So oftentimes when people are triggered, because it comes up different ways for different, but sometimes I've heard a lot about grounding techniques. And so I think that oftentimes when someone is triggered, they're kind of being taken to that place of the traumatic event in one way or another. And so sometimes just in the moment, grounding can be something that kind of reminds you to be present where you are and that this is where you are. So for an example of that is someone who maybe they find themselves having been triggered and they're feeling it in one way or another, because we can talk about multiple ways how this shows up for people. But oftentimes it could be sitting, making sure your feet are flat to the ground, deep breathing, and being connected with the breath, which tends to keep a person present in the moment. When they're focused on their breathing, they're focused on the right now. And so it can help bring a person to this present moment. So that's more so just like, I guess I would say that's not necessarily the healing, but it's one of those coping strategies that a person could utilize.
In the moment, in the moment, if you're triggered, absolutely, yeah. Mm-hmm.
But in terms of other ways of healing, I think one of the things is, first of all, understanding if there is some trauma that occurred, because oftentimes, even for myself in my past, I have had situations occur, and because they weren't these big T or events such as having been raped or molested, I would not think that necessarily it was a trauma, you know. But as I learned about things more and saw how I responded to things more, I came to understand that I really am responding to certain things, and I am viewing a lot of things from that seat of those wounds. And so one of the things I was saying as part of healing is to be able to learn yourself enough to know if that's happened for you, and no one can really dictate that for a person. If a person feels that they have gone through something that was very difficult that maybe has impacted them in traumatic ways, then that's valid for them, you know. And then I would say also in terms of healing is, if possible, therapy is a big part. It's just a big part of healing, because it's not, you know, so therapy isn't there for you to have as a crutch necessarily for the rest of your life. But if someone does need therapy for the rest of their life, that's okay too. But oftentimes therapy is there to help navigate the emotions in a safe space, especially if you've connected and found a good rapport with the therapist. It's also there to, the therapist helps in terms of helping process, also helping to maybe shift perspective on a thing, because sometimes the perspective is a big part of how we're going to respond, and also providing techniques and coping strategies, and going through those things. And oftentimes when someone has addressed and been able to go back and process these things in a new light, not to take away from what occurred, never to minimize it, but what is going to be helpful for this person to move forward. Oftentimes when they are able to process these things, and the word, I don't want to say find peace with it, but because, you know, people are different places. It's not for me to tell someone to find peace with something, but you know, but to be able to have this way of accepting what happened in a way that can help someone move forward. Oftentimes when those things are addressed, or those dynamics are addressed, and you're able to look at it, process it, you know, you look from
Crystal.
I got you. Okay. So that we can look at things from a different perspective, possibly. Oftentimes, some of the intensity of the trauma can subside. A lot of symptoms can subside through the therapy process. But the key to that is that everyone is just not there and ready to address those things, because for some people, it speaks to how difficult the matter was. And therapy does mean you have to go back. Remember when I mentioned some people don't like to think about the trauma,
right?
It's difficult. But to go through therapy would mean having to go back and have your mind on this trauma, to think about it in order to even be able to move through it. So space at times, but I have definitely seen people's symptoms decrease after having had therapy.
Is it possible, you know, to heal from trauma without actually, you know, sort of processing it?
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't like to say no to anything, because I know I've never seen every situation, and I like to that anything could be possible. I think that, but that's a really good question. We'll
do some research on that one.
Yeah, really to that would really be some, like, I would say maybe there are people who can heal from trauma, maybe, and they didn't see a therapist and they used other methods. You know,
But they processed it. They went through some kind of process. Yeah.
Because I would even mention that another part of healing is to be able to, if a person has someone they trust, they really trusted friend, therapist is one, but also a trusted friend who they could at least start to have the conversations with. You've gone through things as a kid that were traumatic, and I didn't even mention it to anyone until I was well into my late 20s, and that's the closest people in my life, because it just, I don't know, it's just something about those things that we, sometimes there could be a lot of shame or things that just can surround that, that person from talking. But I would say starting the conversation with someone that you can trust could also be a way to start that.
You know, if you see someone who you suspect is kind of responding to maybe some trauma, maybe something about their life or what they have gone through, is it something that somebody that's not the person should ever bring up? You know, if we see somebody that's gone through something, should we, approach the subject as a friend or, loved one, somebody that cares about the person?
Good question. I think it's okay depending on the nature of the relationship. And I think as in with a lot of other mental health, it's okay to acknowledge. For some people, the acknowledgement is a level of support. So to even be able to just say, hey, I noticed, that you were really upset about this particular situation. Do you want to talk about it? So I don't think that we should. Oftentimes things happen and we kind of get stuck. Like I should say,
bring it up.
For some people, maybe it would be a bit much, but that person can at least know that you cared enough to acknowledge it. Now, if they don't want to go there, then that is, I can be
absolutely. Yeah.
But I think that in the acknowledgement, I think can be for some people that first step to know that someone sees me or someone cares enough to even bring this up to me.
And I think sometimes it is the seeing and acknowledging of the true feelings that, I think can help people move forward. That, this happened to me, and then somebody, validates that I feel what I feel, whatever the feelings are valid. And so I think sometimes just that acknowledgement that I'm responding perhaps, to something that happened to me can be helpful. So, what do you have any part? I have a couple of notes that I want to just go over before we leave. But is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to offer to those that may be listening to us right now?
Sure. I'll talk real quick just about these 4 trauma responses. They're the responses that you can see a person experience in the moment of a threat, in the moment of trauma, but also kind of some characteristic traits that a person can carry later on in life that still be associated.
Gotcha.
So the 4 trauma responses there, some may have heard of them: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Those are the 4 trauma responses. I'm just going to briefly go through each of them. So I think fight and flight is what we tend to hear most when we talk about this adrenaline rush or being aroused in the moment of facing danger. So the first one, fight, the theme that goes along with that for a person is self-preservation. It's like needing to protect themselves in the moment. If someone's faced with a bear or some wild animal, oftentimes fight what might be the thing. Well, I don't know if we're going to try to fight a bear, but there may be certain animals that we would try to fight off because we're in a corner and it's just no choice. You're going to have to do it. And so that's a normal response to defending self. We get the adrenaline rush, and we're there facing the perceived threat. Oftentimes it's a real threat, but sometimes what happens when we've had trauma is that then later in life, we perceive a lot of things as threats that in that moment, especially if we haven't healed from the trauma, we're seeing our events that happen to us through the wounded eyes.
Through the trauma.
And so for someone who characteristically may still be dealing with this and fight is their trauma response, then you may see a person who's more angry. They may be a bit more regressive. They may display a lot of rage. But this is all in the attempt to protect themselves or to control their environment, because the safety oftentimes for some people is the control. If they can keep the control, then they feel safe because they have the control, right? Anything unknown or where you have to rely on someone else can be perceived as threatening or as a possibility of something negative happening or unsafe happening. That's fine. And then I'll talk about flight. Well, flight would be that other response that you may see in the face of that animal. This would be a bear probably, is that you're going to flee. You're going to run. You're going to try to escape. You're going to try to leave the situation. And that's often, again, all of these are normal responses when a true threat is there. But when someone is experiencing trauma, they're still, through those wounded eyes and later on in life, then this can come off as someone who maybe they're a perfectionist. Maybe they might micromanage situations. They might, and all of that again is a way of having control of the situation. But they tend to want to create physical space between them and the traumatic event or what they're perceiving as being that in that moment. And that's to avoid being out of control or avoid, they also avoid conflict.
Gotcha.
You are fleeing someone. There is some avoidant personality traits that could be there for someone who functions from that trauma response.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then there's freeze. Freeze is one I associate with, actually, that I felt in my body as a younger person. And in that a person is trying to disassociate from the threat. So, and it's often seen with people who are rape victims. Someone is attempting to display this aggression toward them, and they may literally freeze, not because they want this to happen, but it is really a response that people have, and maybe if they, and you will even see this in an animal, that they will play dead, in the hope that maybe the aggressor will leave, and so freeze is a true trauma response, and oftentimes a person is immobilized in threatening or intense situations. Maybe they don't speak up for themselves in those moments when even they're not in the space of the true threat, but they're perceiving things as a threat. And so when conflict comes, maybe they're not vocal, or they also may isolate, and they just don't do well with certain social situations. And then the last trauma response is fawn, FAWN. Fawn is kind of like another way I've seen this listed as friend. So it's a way to try to appease the desires of maybe who they feel the threat is. In order to have safety. Maybe if they can satisfy this person or be kind enough to this person, it can maybe change the heart of this person to be nice to them. And oftentimes in people who experience trauma response through the way of fawn, there's a lot of poor boundaries. That is just, there are no established boundaries because of this. There tends to be a lot of people pleasing and a lot of concern about how others may view them.
Okay.
Those are the four trauma responses I didn't want to forget.
Oh, wow. Awesome. So thank you for that. Again, it's how this can show up in our lives, when, whether we're aware of, having had trauma, this is kind of how it shows up. So I think the biggest thing that I take away from what you said, Crystal, is to be curious, right? And that is when there's things that are happening, and we're not moving forward, to be curious about why, why is that? To do a little exploration about, perhaps what is the thing that is stopping us, and maybe with the help of, a professional, somebody who maybe specializes, if you suspect trauma or if you know it's trauma, maybe, exploring why you're showing up, and maybe you can tie it back to that. Or if you're not aware of trauma, and you do discover some things, and you might want to get that professional help. But I think the biggest thing is being curious, because we can't really address something we're not aware of.
It's very true.
It's hard to fix it if we don't know what the problem is.
That's very true. I have a mentor who also talks about being a scientist self. You know what I mean? Like, it's a lot of time on other people, but it's really always comes back to ourselves.
Always.
So much, especially if we've dealt with trauma, oftentimes we're living from the aspect of the event that happened, and we don't get to the core of who it is we really are, and relearning who we are, not in the face of those things that happened, but just in who it is that we were made to be authentically. And yeah, I think that's I think that's a very big key to when we decide to learn about ourselves. We will find out how interesting we are as individuals.
We really are. We could just spend, so much time on that. And that's why I talk about leading yourself is really the foundation to leadership, because until you can lead yourself, and of course awareness is the key part of that. Self-awareness is the key part of that. I always say it's a strategic advantage to any person, whether they're, everybody's a leader from my perspective, but whether you're just leading yourself or leading others, that ability to be self-aware is key. But sometimes that requires us to be curious about what it is, why we're responding the way we are. I found myself being triggered just a couple of years ago, and I was like, "Wow, what is going on here?" Right? And so I just got really, really curious about what was going on, and so did some digging with the help of my therapist, and who I hadn't talked to in a few years. But I was like, "Hey, I need some help." So, I can laugh about it now, but at the time I was just like, what is going on? And so, that curiosity, I think, is just can be really helpful about, about ourselves, and about our responses, and about our behaviors, especially if it's not something that is in alignment with what we intend. Which brings me back to the whole reason kind of for focusing on this, because, this person that is Will Smith, has been so intentional about so many aspects of his life. And so regardless of, if this was a trauma trigger, which a lot of professionals think it was, or if it was intentional, I don't know that his actions have garnered the response that he wants.
Yeah.
And that's really the end of the day. At the end of the day, that's really, what matters is, did the action you take get you what you wanted, get you what you intended? And if it did, great. And if not, then, let's figure out why. And that's really kind of what we all should be doing. So, Crystal!
You went out.
Did I go out? Okay, it was me that time. I was just, kind of wrapping it up around this whole theme of intention. So, I'm going to go back and look at the replay before I put it out there, and I may need to do a little editing.
As long as you know how to do that. See, I have to get on this StreamYard. I downloaded it, but now I need to figure out how to make it active.
It's really easy. It's not hard. I don't know why I'm getting this. Like I said, I'm right here in my office near my modem. So I don't know why we're getting this with my most powerful most powerful internet. So I don't know what's going on, but anyway. All right, Crystal, thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate you. And for those of you that are watching, or if you're watching live, or if you're watching after the fact, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Crystal is not in the group, but we might convince her to join the group, and just be there to answer any questions that you may have or I can always ask her, hey, somebody had this question, and we can get an answer back to you. So thank you so much for joining us, whether you're live or you're watching after the fact. Thanks for watching. And I'll be right here again next Sunday for Set It Up Sunday. Have a great rest of your evening.
Have a great evening. Thanks, Renita.
Thank you.